Hi friends, today we are going to discuss about brain, the neuroanatomy of the brain, functioning of the brain, and also why the mental illness occurs. We are going to answer in this video. I am Dr. Suresh Badadmat, Professor of Psychiatry, Head of Telemedicine Center and Forensic Psychiatry Services at Neurons, Bangalore. Why should we know about brain? What is the need? See, brain is a vital organ of our body. It is so vital. If there is a brain death occurs, the person is considered as dead. Even though his heart is beating, even his kidney is functioning, even if there is other area of the body is functioning and the brain death is there, then it is considered as dead. That means once the person becomes brain dead, he is, as per the law, he is no more a person. That means brain is so vital. The reason being is the brain is the center for thinking, that is cognition, emotions, and also the memory, whatever we keep as a life souvenir in our brain, that is whatever the memories we are going to keep it, that also is stored in the brain. So because of this vital organ, we have to discuss about the brain. Once we know about the brain and its function, then only we'll be able to understand the psychiatric illness or mental illness. Without knowing brain, the mental illness becomes more enigma. So let's understand about brain in this video. How does brain looks in the scan? Scan is basically MRI scan, that is magnetic resonance imaging scan, or very oftenly called as CT scan. So computerized tomography is the word CT scan. How does it look? This is the lateral view of MRI scan. See, lateral view means it is the side view. The nose you can see the mouth and also the brain. So this is how the scan is seen in MRI. And the topmost part of the brain is called as cerebrum. And the end part here is a small lobule is there, that is called as cerebellum. And then there is something called as brainstem, and finally at the down, it is in the down part is considered as spinal cord. So these are the important brain structures: cerebrum, cerebellum, spinal cord, and brainstem. You can see that how the MRI scan looks. The next question is, how does brain looks in real life? So this is how the brain looks. Again, you can see the top. That is again, it's a lateral view. That is the view from the side. The brain is been holding like this, not from straight. It is from the lateral view, that is the side view. In the side view, you can see the frontal, top, and the back portion. So this is how the brain looks in the real life. And I told you about the cerebellum. The cerebellum is in the down one. So again, this is the real brain, how it looks, the top portion. And again, it's a lateral view. I'm talking about lateral view. So top, frontal, back. So these are the important, what we call it as the way the brain looks. Now let's look into the various parts of the brain. Again, it is top and frontal and back. If you look at this part, the front part, that is the frontal lobe. And the down part here, it is called as temporal lobe. And then the above one, its yellow position, is called as parietal lobe. And then the last part is called as occipital. And then here is the cerebellum. And after that cerebellum, the down one is called as the brainstem. So now you can see the various part of the brain. Again, it is from the lateral view, how the brain is: the frontal lobe, temporal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and then the cerebellum, and then the brainstem. This is how the brain areas have been designated. Please do understand, the frontal lobe is very essential. The difference between man and monkey is the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is very well developed in man. So here, the frontal lobe is the place, whatever there is a difference between man and monkey is designated in the frontal lobe. For example, man has a thinking power. So that's in the frontal lobe. Man has a personality. That's in the frontal lobe. Man can speak, understand language. That is again in the frontal lobe. And also, the man knows how to inhibit his impulses. That means the monkey, when he sees banana, it goes and snatches it. But man doesn't do. So the frontal lobe inhibits the impulses. That means it does not allow a person to break the what we call it as social norms. Frontal lobe tells the man, tells the human being to behave within the realm of the society. So frontal lobe is like just like a judiciary, according to me. So just for understanding, the frontal lobe is more of what we call it as judiciary. Now coming to the temporal lobe, that's the red one. Temporal lobe is basically it is the bank. All memory is stored here. This part. It comes as a temporal lobe. So this temporal lobe, where the memory is stored. The memory may be words, language, and also what we call it as the non-verbal memory. That is music or various other memories are stored. That comes under the temporal lobe. And then the above is the parietal lobe. Parietal lobe is a kind of business center. This is where the calculation occurs. The calculation is arithmetics one. Also, in the real life, if I have to ride a vehicle or overtake a bus, at what speed I have to go, it also is determined here. At the same time, if you want to throw a ball into the dustbin or somewhere, at what speed, at what rate, at what energy should be consumed is told in the parietal lobe. So parietal lobe is more of a business center. The last part, you can see that this part is occipital lobe. Occipital lobe is basically where the visual perception occurs here. And then the below the occipital lobe is the cerebellum. Cerebellum is a area of balance where we balance the way we walk, the way we ride the bicycle, all those kinds of balancing act occurs in the cerebellum. And the lowest part is the brain stem. The stem where it is there, it is very essential. It is the oldest part of the brain. Here, mainly heartbeat center is there, breathing center is there, and also vomiting kind of center also comes in here. See, the brainstem is the oldest of the human or what you call it as animal part of the brain, and there for heartbeat, that is the place which what we call it as that is the center which controls. Brainstem is the one which controls heartbeat and also breathing. See, nobody tells you to breathe. You automatically continue to breathe till you die. So that breathing center, taking inspiration and expiration without your knowledge, it occurs. That is there in the brainstem. If any damage occurs in the brainstem, that means the breathing stops. At the same time, any injury severely to the what we call it as the brainstem, even the heart does not listen to the brain. So then the heart becomes independent. That means heart will not function as per the brain's protocol. So this is the way the brain looks. Just to recapitulate, friends. So this is the frontal lobe, this is the temporal lobe, this is the parietal lobe, that is the occipital lobe, and that is the cerebellum, and the bottom post is the brainstem. Moving further again, if you look at this diagram, you can see the cerebrum, and then the cerebellum, and also here you can see the brainstem. So this is the brainstem, and this part is the spinal cord. So if the brainstem is basically here, the brainstem is here, we are going to discuss about brainstem shortly. And then the below part is called as spinal cord. So the nerves from the brain go through this called as spinal cord to the whole body. So when it goes there is a stem called as brain stem. So this is the brain stem, very important structure, and it's the oldest part of the brain. And moving further, you can see frontal lobe, temporal lobe, parietal lobe, and then the occipital lobe, and then this is the blue color is the cerebellum. So with this, now we will see the top view. If we look at the brain from the above, that is from the from the top, you can see the frontal, then you can see the right hemisphere, left hemisphere, and back. So every person has two hemisphere of brain. We don't call it as two brains. We call it as the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. So the right hemisphere controls the left part of the body. And the same thing, left hemisphere controls the right parts of the body. Why it is happening so? That's the way that nature or the God has created the human being. So whenever there is an injury, especially weakness on the or a paralysis on the right side, if you look at the brain, there will be a problem on the left side of the brain. Usually that is the way it goes. So this is how the top view of the brain is seen. Now you look at the brain stem. See, this is the brain stem which I spoke about. So this is this part, mid part of the brain. From here we have taken and we have enlarged this. So if you enlarge this, you can see midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. From below is the spinal cord. This portion, brainstem, is a very important structures, important functions, basically with regard to survival of the human being, is there in this brainstem. So this is the thalamus. You look at this thalamus, and then comes the midbrain. Then comes there are various cranial nerves, and then the spinal cord below, and the medulla oblongata, what we call it as. So this is how the brain looked. But now, if you move into the midsection of the brain, you look at the midsection of the brain. This is how it looks. So this it is called as thalamus. The one which is the round color, this is the thalamus usually, and then the midbrain. Here is the midbrain, and then comes the spinal cord below, and then here the medulla oblongata. This is the medulla oblongata, and this is the hypothalamus. Here is the hypothalamus, and then the pineal gland is here, and there is a very important structure here. That structure is called as pituitary gland, and then the cerebellum here. So above, one important structure comes. This is called as corpus callosum. This is the one which connects between the two hemisphere. I told you there are two, right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of the brain. This corpus callosum is the one which connects between both the hemispheres. Now we will look into the various parts of the brain as an animation. So the brain, how it looks. So by looking grossly, it is called as anatomy. You look at the lateral view of the brain. So the lateral view is the one which I had shown you. That is the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe, brainstem, and cerebellum. Now, if we look at the middle, if you see the middle portion of the brain, in the middle of the brain, you can see the parietal lobe, and then the occipital lobe, cerebellum, and various other parts. Now, if we move on to the top portion, the top position of the brain, if you look from the top, you can see the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of the brain. So that is the top view of the brain. The top view of the brain, you don't say that there are two brains. We call it as right hemisphere, left hemisphere. Again, from top, you can see the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, and occipital lobe. Temporal lobe is not seen. The temporal lobe is seen in the lateral view only, and that is where the memory is stored. Now, coming to the bottom portion, that is the bottom part of the brain. That is very essential. That is the brainstem. So that brainstem has what we call it as midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. These are the very important structures of the brain. And here, another important gland is shown here by the arrow, that is called as pituitary gland, and it is the master gland which what we call it as which controls the rest of the glands in the body. The pituitary gland, if you look into here, this is the pituitary gland where thalamus and hypothalamus is there, and then the pituitary gland which is there being enlarged in the picture here. So that is the way how the pituitary gland is seen. Now the brain, you can see the various parts: frontal lobe, temporal lobe, parietal lobe, and the occipital lobe, and various other structure. Now we are going to take a piece of the brain, like you consider the brain as a cake, birthday cake, and you have taken a slice. The slice, you can see the slice is here. That slice you can see there. That slice, from the slice we have enlarged here. See, you can see the slice has white matter below, and the above is the gray matter. But in cake, when you order a cake, invariably the cream will be on the top, the brown color cake will be in the bottom. But in the brain, it is reverse. The gray matter will be on the top, that is the cake part will be on the top, and the cream part will be the below. I'll discuss why there is what is called as gray matter and white matter. We will discuss that. And this is, the whole brain is like a cake, and if you look at the cut, if you cut the brain into small, like a cake piece, this is how it looks. What is the importance of having this slice and seeing? So if you look at the normal brain, a normal brain on the other side is, look at the way the brain is very healthy. But in the dementia case, in this side, the dementia case, the gray matter becomes thinning. It is almost like a very weak brain. It's like the brain has been shrunken. So that is the memory. You can see that memory, the square. The white part is very heavily and very well documented in the normal brain. But here in this, you can look at that the uh, memory part is the white matter and the gray matter is very thinned out, especially in Alzheimer's dementia. Let's know the way the brain has been considered. The brain approximately forms the 2% of your body weight. If you are 50 kg, it will be approximately 1 kg to 1.2 kg. So it's an approximation I'm talking about. Invariably, the weight of the brain is 1200 grams to 1500 grams. That is 1 to 1.5 kg. Roughly, we can talk about. And cerebrum, I talked about cerebrum. It is the largest part of the brain and it is 85% it is there. And the whole part of the body, the brain is forms only the 2%, the whole body. You can ask, sir, there is a person who is 120 kg. That means his brain is 2.5 kg? No, it's between 1.2 to 1500 grams. I'm talking about normal people, not morbid obese people. 2% in general population who are healthy, not in the obesity. So 2% of our body weight roughly is our weight of our brain. At the same time, please do remember, though it is only 2%, it requires 20% of oxygen, 20% of calories, that is glucose, and also 20% of the blood supply. Brain is like a VIP area in your city. Though the city is 100% and VIP area may be 1%, the VIP area electricity doesn't go, water supply doesn't go, security is well maintained there. So that is the way brain is a VIP in your body. It requires 20% oxygen, 20% of glucose, that is calories. At the same time, 20% of the blood supply. If the blood supply to the brain stops for more than 10 seconds, the person becomes unconscious. That means it is very vital. The heart has to pump. If the heart doesn't pump, the person becomes unconscious and falls down. That is the reason whenever the blood is not pumped by the heart and the person is losing consciousness, the first and the foremost thing is to check whether the heart is functioning or not. So, and the brain is a very active part of your body and it requires high oxygen, high calories, and high percentage of what we call it as blood supply, though it is only 2%. As I mentioned, if the if the blood supply to the brain is cut off for more than 8 to 10 seconds, the person loses consciousness. And many people get that feeling of love. That is because of oxytocin, a hormone secreted in the brain, right to the brain. You can see the heart at the center of the chest. From there are various blood vessels are moving. And the two lateral ones are there. They go to the various limbs, basically upper hand and lower limbs. And now there are two important, what we call it as carotid arteries, which are going towards the brain, one on the right side and the other one on the left side. Again, they further divide it into external and internal carotid arteries. So these carotid arteries are the main blood supply on the right side and left side, and they go to the right side and left side of the hemisphere. And they enter into the brain, and then these blood supply occurs. These arteries are the main supply of what we call it as blood to the various part of the brain. And then if you look at this a whole circle, you can see that circle is called as circle of Willis. Basically, circle of Willis is been there are four feeding channels, four arteries which supply to the brain. So any stoppage of blood will not stop the blood supply. One stoppage doesn't stop. So now further you look into the artery. This artery is a basically blood vessel. The blood vessel is carrying the red blood corpuscles. Along with that, the oxygen and glucose are given to the neurons. Those yellow colored portions are called as neurons. So the blood is moving in that red blood corpuscles, supplies oxygen and glucose to the neurons so that they can function smoothly. And this is again I am recapitulating. So you can see the circle of Willis, and there are four arteries. I had mentioned you there are four arteries which come here. These are the two internal carotid arteries, that is basically carotid arteries. These are the basilar arteries. Again, here is a basilar artery is here, and these are the cerebral arteries. So this forms the circle of Willis. Even one portion gets cut off, the blood supply continues from the other three vessels. So it's the way the nature has given a good compensatory mechanism. Now we will move into the brain and spinal cord. So if you look at the brain and spinal cord, this is how it looks into the this is the whole brain, and then this is the cerebellum, and then the spinal cord moves down along the spine. This is the spine that moves along that. So brain and spinal cord. How does the brain and spinal cord forms the central nervous system? So this is the brain, and this is the whole spinal cord. So cerebrum, cerebellum, and the whole thing is spinal cord. This whole package of the brain is being packed into the skull. The brain goes into the skull, and this spinal cord goes into the spinal column. This is the spine. So basically, please understand, this is the whole brain goes into the skull, and the spinal cord goes here inside the spine. This is how the whole central nervous system gets packed, because the brain and nerves needs to be well protected. Further, what happens once the brain and the spinal cord, the nerves comes out of the spinal cord and it supplies to the various parts of the body. It will supply to the skin, it will supply to the muscles, it will supply to the various part of the body, and this blue color is considered as the nerves, and these nerves are going to even to the tip of the finger. If there is any pinprick, or there is a burns, or if you touch a hot vessel, suddenly the nerve sends the impulse to the brain telling that there is something hot is there, don't go there, it will burn you. So immediately the hand will be withdrawn. The person moves away from the injury stimuli. Further, look at the way the nerves have been supplying to the various parts of the whole body, and that part is considered as peripheral nervous system. So please understand, the brain and spinal cord is called as central nervous system, and these blue color is considered as peripheral nervous system. So this is the whole thing is considered as peripheral nervous system. So let's understand how the brain looks. The brain is here, and then the brain and the spinal cord. The nerves are moving out of the various, what we call it as spine vertebrae, vertebral column we consider as. Let's understand. In the brain, these are the vertebrae and the spinal cord. The spinal cord, the nerves are coming out. The nerves not only supplies the muscles and skin, they also supplies eye, salivary gland, heart, lungs, stomach, pancreas, intestine. Every part of the body is supplied, is controlled by the brain. So now you understand the important function of the brain is it controls the whole part of the body. Let's discuss about the brain coverings now. So you can see this is the skull and the brain inside, and we have taken a portion of the skull and the brain and it is enlarged here. So this is enlarged. This is the brain, this is the pia mater, this is arachnoid matter, and there is a dura mater, and then the cranium. Cranium is nothing but a skull. This is the skull, these are hair, and skin is here. So this is how the whole brain covering occurs. Further, if you look at this again, skin, that is scalp, this is the skull, cranium is skull, dura mater, the green color, the blue color called as arachnoid space, arachnoid, and this is the subarachnoid space. Here the blood vessels are going, and this is the pia mater, and this is the brain matter, or what you call it, cerebral cortex. I told you cerebral, this is. So these are the coverings. So there are important 4 coverings: pia mater, arachnoid, dura, and the skull. So these are the 4 coverings for the brain. In this covering and the space between the coverings, there is something called as cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is which is there inside the ventricle, that is inside the brain, and also on the outside of the brain and the spinal cord. So that is called as cerebrospinal fluid. So cerebrospinal fluid, it is a clear and colorless body fluid especially which is there in the brain and surrounds the spinal cord. At any given point of time, inside the brain, there will be 125 to 150 ml of this cerebrospinal fluid. Every day, 500 to 600 milliliter of cerebrospinal fluid is produced. This cerebrospinal fluid is produced by choroid plexus. This is how the brain is there. This blue color is the cerebrospinal fluid which is been covered the brain, and this is the whole even to the spinal cord. The spinal cord ends here, but the fluid and the covering continues. So the whole brain and the spinal cord is well covered by the pia matter, arachnoid matter, dura matter. Inside these space, the cerebrospinal fluid is there. And specifically, this fluid is more in subarachnoid space, where the cerebrospinal fluid is found. What is the function of this cerebrospinal fluid? Basically, it gives cushioning and mechanical protection for the brain and the spinal cord. The brain and spinal cord are very, very sensitive and they are very soft. Hence, it has to be covered by a skull or the bone and then various structures like pia matter, arachnoid matter, and dura matter. So, they needs to be covered and protected. The cerebrospinal fluid one is giving mechanical protection and it supplies nutrition like oxygen, glucose, vitamins, minerals, electrolytes will be supplied to the various parts of the brain, including the inside of the brain. It also removes waste products, those like carbon dioxide and various things which have been utilized. Those will be removed by the cerebrospinal fluid and again it will be discharged into the blood vessels. So if you look at this, the whole cerebrospinal fluid is secreted by choroid plexus and then it will be absorbed by arachnoid granulation of the veins or blood vessels. Now you can see here is the choroid plexus. This choroid plexus are secreting the CSF, that is cerebrospinal fluid, and that comes down. This is called as lateral ventricles, third ventricle. This is the fourth ventricle. These are the space. Ventricle means space. From here, the CSF circulates across the whole skull and then the spinal cord below. And these are the arachnoid granulation where the CSF will be again further absorbed into the vein. Now, let's watch a small movie on how the cerebrospinal fluid is secreted. This is the video which talks about how cerebrospinal fluids are generated and circulates and protects. So look at the choroid plexus which is secreting the CSF 125 to 150 ml. The secreted, that blue color which is moving from lateral ventricle to third ventricle, and that the fluid which is secreted by a choroid plexus moves further down to the fourth ventricle. From the fourth ventricle, it covers the cerebellum, the whole cerebrum, and then it gives a cushioning, protection, and nutrition and removes metabolites. That basically removes the waste. There is the arachnoid granulation which secretes back the CSF into the various blood vessels. So this is how the whole CSF covers the whole brain and the spinal cord and gives a protection and also nutrition. Now we will discuss about neurons. Neurons are the unit of brain. See, look at the brain. The brain has been made up of these individual cells. They are called as neuron. So the neuron, you can see the various parts of the single neuron. The neuron, you can see there, the neuron has a body. This is the whole thing is called as body. I'm circling their body. And then there is a nucleus. And the branches are called as dendrites. From there, you can see an axon. And then it looks like a axon terminals here. It's just like a tree or a plant. If you can understand the neuron as a kind of a plant. If you look at this, the whole body of the plant is leaves and everywhere. There is a huge stem and then these are the roots. So the stem is called as axon and then the down is called as axon terminals. So this is the unit of a brain is neuron. Look at the number of neurons. The neurons are 80 to 90 billion neurons. In terms of crore, You, me, and every person on this earth has 8,000 to 9,000 crore neurons. Not 1 crore, 2 crore. 8,000 to 9,000 crore neurons. That means we are all rich by neurons. So these many 9,000 crore neurons have been packed into a small brain, which is hardly 1.5 kg. But the numbers are 9,000 crore neurons. And each neuron will have a connection for 1,000 synapses. I'll come to that later. See, I told you in one of the brain, the upper portion is called as a gray matter. The gray matter are these places where the body of the whole cell stays. This is the dendrites, nucleus, and this is the whole soma. From here, there is something called as axon. From axon, it becomes terminals. So this part is considered as white matter, and above the axon is considered as a gray matter. So gray matter is above, white matter is below. So the spinal cord, usually maximum it is represented by white matter. Though there are some gray matter, but it is maximum is white matter. Similarly, the brain has maximum covering is basically the gray matter. From the gray matter, the neurons, the stem generates. So this is how the gray matter and white matter and how the neurons are represented. See, now another important function. I told you one neuron will communicate with another neuron by a connection called as synapses. So now you can see there is one neuron, there is another neuron. So this connection is called as synapses. The connection between one neuron to another neuron. So these are the neurons and these are the supporting cells for the neuron. So these are the nerve cells. The nerve cells, when they connect to two nerves, they are called as synapse. So the electrical impulses comes like this and it goes towards the axon, the axon terminals. Chemical is released here. They are called as neurochemicals. Neurochemicals or neurohormone are released in the synapses. From there, it goes to the opposite neuron, another neuron, and then again the impulses are produced. Means electrical impulses produces chemicals, and again that chemical produces electrical impulses, and it goes. So each neuron has 1,000 connections. That is called as synapses. So we have 9,000 crore neurons into 1,000 is the number of synapses. So that is the number of synapses we have. So again, if you look at this is the nerve cell, and this is a small structure that is the connection of the one neuron. The connection between the one neuron to another neuron is this is the connection. It has been shown here. This is synapses. See, the electrical impulses goes like this and it comes at the end of that, and then it produces chemicals, and this chemical produces electrical impulses. So then you have understood the to some extent neuron, and then the synapses, the connection between two neurons, and then the chemical is released here. Then how does psychiatric illness is produced? Mental illness is produced. To understand this, we will watch a small animation. Now we will discuss about the how the functions of the neuron in the brain. You can see the brain and the neurons. There is an action potential which is traveling through the axons. So this is action potential, or what we call it as electrical impulses traveling along the axon from one neuron to another neuron. There is a connection between one neuron to another neuron. It is called as synapses. The electrical impulse came, chemical got released. And again the chemicals go back to the original neuron. So each neuron makes 1,000 connections. That means there are 1,000 synapses available. So electrical impulses generated comes to the presynaptic end, and then the chemicals are released. This chemical now produces action potential. Means electrical impulses are converted into neurochemical reaction. From neurochemical reaction, the electrical impulses is connected. It occurs at very fast rate. In milliseconds it occurs. Electrical impulses releases chemicals, and the chemicals again causes the electrical impulses. These neurochemicals are very, very important for the diagnosis of mental illness. Either the increased in these chemicals or decrease in the chemicals causes psychiatric illnesses. So, ladies and gentlemen, please understand, depending upon the area of chemical neurochemicals increased or decreased, the mental illness develops or psychiatric illnesses develop. For example, if there is an increase in dopamine, certain parts of the brain, schizophrenia is developed. If there is increased other neurohormones, other mental illness. If there is a decreased serotonin, depression will develop. If there is a decrease in serotonin in some other areas of the brain, obsessive compulsive disorder is. So, depending upon various imbalances in neurochemicals, psychiatric illness is developing. So, before I conclude, I would like to remind you, see, when you look at this neurons as a brain, we have 8,000 crore to 9,000 crore neurons. And each neuron forms 1,000 synapses. So, invariably, there are huge number of synapses, and the neurochemicals are very minute, and it is very difficult to determine this number of neurons. And any number of CT scan, MRI will not show any abnormality because it shows only the structure. The problem is in the functioning of the neurochemical. The chemicals are very less, certain illnesses will come. The chemicals are more, certain other psychiatric illnesses are caused. So please understand, psychiatric illnesses are a brain disorder. They are usually occurred because of hormonal imbalances. These hormonal imbalances are occur secondary to the environmental stressors or because of the hereditary or genetic vulnerability or combination of stressor and genetic vulnerability. My dear friends, today you have understood about the brain, different areas or the anatomy of the brain, cerebrospinal fluid, various coverings of the brain, also the neuron, number of neurons, functioning of the neuron, and the synapses and the neurochemical balances which causes mental illness. Hence, no blood test, no urine test, or even CT scan, MRI scan will determine the diagnosis of mental illness. Our science has not progressed to that level to measure the loss of chemicals or increase of chemicals in the brain synapses. So hence, all mental illnesses are secondary to neurochemical imbalances. So thank you very much for your patience listening and giving your time. If you want to see similar videos, please subscribe to my channel either in the Facebook or in the YouTube. So the channel is called as Suresh Padamat. So please stay safe and take care of yourself. Thank you very much once again.